Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Bella Rose.
Hey, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining. If this is your first time to the show, welcome. I'm so grateful that you have decided to go ahead and tune in, and I hope that this is going to be an encouragement to you. It's kind of a challenging topic. In fact, it is a really challenging topic, and sadly affects far more women than you would expect. So we're going to talk about some of that, who it affects, and why this happens to women. Why, if you have experienced it, it may have happened to you. What's going on in our culture, and then I want to talk about healing, steps of healing, and sorting through and how you can heal even through your marriage, and even specifically through sex, which may seem completely counterintuitive, but I want to just give you a lot of hope. Let's dive in. All right. Well, so first off, I want to just say that I have not been, quote, sexually abused in the maybe traditional sense, if that makes sense. But I have experienced quite a lot that I think warrants the discussion. I don't want to make the bar so high that we can't talk about things that we haven't, quote, experienced. Because the problem is, if we require the victims to talk about this, and they're the only ones that have the authority to talk about sexual abuse, why then it doesn't get talked about because it's too painful. It's too hard, So I'm coming into this conversation with a lot of humility, because maybe you on the other end of this microphone are saying, you know what, that's not really my experience, or that's not really how I feel through this. But let me just tell you, this is a first step. I'm hopeful that this will get you feeling like you're not alone. I'm hopeful this will get you feeling like there's someone out there that cares, even if she can't completely relate. What she can do is say, you know what, you have a story, and you have a voice, and there should be space for it, and you should have the ability to be healed and be freed from the pain that haunts you. So I hope that you'll kind of listen with an open heart and soft, grace-filled mind as I talk about things that I'm hopeful will encourage you, and at the very least let you know that you're not alone. Why am I talking about it? Number one, it needs to be talked about. You may know about the Me Too movement that's happening right now, and actually was started about 10 years ago. I heard a talk by the founder recently, and I didn't realize that it's been going on for so long, but she was a victim, and her purpose in this movement is to give victims a voice and let them know that this is happening. And it's not to demonize men, not in the least. The whole purpose is to give victims of sexual abuse space and hope and healing. So that's number one. Number two, I have experienced very close to date rape a number of times, and by God's grace, really only by God's grace did it change? Did it not happen? So one time I had to physically push a man out of my apartment, and he practically fell down the stairs because he was actually trying to push me into my room to date rape me. He got into my apartment because he lied and said he just needed to come in and use the bathroom after he and I had drinks that night. So I think it was just adrenaline that I was able to yell at him and scream and push him out. So that was really a God thing, but it easily could not have gone that way. So I really don't know how I was able to get him out, because he was definitely bigger than me. So another one is I also had to physically pull a friend out of a bathroom where a man was trying to push her in so he could rape her. Like, it was this very awkward, like, it was in a bar, but it was like this bathroom that was just in the middle of like where the dance floor was, and he was trying to push her in there, and it was really scary. Another time, I ended up giving in to some guy because I felt like we had already gone too far in the evening we had spent together, and he paid for everything, and I just felt like I had to. Which you might be saying, Bella, that's not abuse. You let that happen. Well, let's talk about that more later. I've also had plenty of dates where men's expectations were sex because we had a meal and drinks or a conversation, and the assumption is, well, that's sufficient. That means that sex is on the table. Another one is I've also just had sex with my husband many times when I didn't want to. And it wasn't, a lot of times, I even encourage women, like, maybe it's going to start out that you don't want to, but when you change your attitude, when you change your perspective on it, like, you start to change your body chemistry as well. Like, it starts to shift. But it's different if you're having sex and the whole time you're thinking, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. That's making you feel abused on the inside, whether it, quote, is abuse or not. Those are those feelings of unsafety and just being used for your body. And so let's talk about maybe something that is more severe than my experiences. Certainly I've grown up in this society where I have felt like a piece of meat many times, and I have been criticized for my body or criticized myself and felt like the whole purpose of my body is to please a man. And I've gone through those stages of womanhood and had to come to the realization that that is not the purpose of my body. Yet it is a privilege in marriage for us to enjoy that, but not the purpose in a society. As a woman, I am far, far more than what my body is. So once again, this is very important to talk about because so often we are not talking about it as Christians in churches, in groups of women together. It's affecting 1 in 4 women this year will be sexually abused. So that's being raped, date raped, it's molested as children, sexually harassed. These are just horrific statistics. And these are your mothers, your sisters, your cousins, and more than likely you will never know about it. And these may very well be your wives if there are any husbands listening. These are deep, shameful things that women have to live with. And it's very, very hard. And it's so sad because so often, even when a woman comes out and says she indeed has been sexually abused or raped, she's shamed for it. She's not believed. And it's so painful because who wants to be known as the woman that was raped? No one wants to be known as a woman who was raped by some powerful man, some person that was some celebrity or something. No one wants that. So why is the automatic thing to not believe the woman that finally comes out and says it? So it's very painful for women to even share, but then so frequently it's just swept under the rug and not even addressed or validated or listened to. So I want to say to you right now on the other end of the line, I'm listening. I want to help. I want to support you. I want you to know you're not alone, and far more than you think have gone through this horror as well. What happened recently is I talked to a very strong, dear friend of mine who's amazing and is doing so many good things in life, loves the Lord, has a great husband, a great, job and what she does. And she was at a work function, and they had a happy hour after work. And I guess this guy had gotten drunk, and he sexually harassed her in front of all of her coworkers, or at least several of them. And she wasn't able to really react. It was so shocking. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a bit. But he literally bent her over and humped her from behind and felt her up in the front. And she was like unable to even respond because she was, again, so shocked. And there's, again, more things that I'm going to talk about for that. But one of the things when I was talking to her about that is, part of the reason she felt like she kind of gave up was like, well, this isn't as bad as other things that have happened to me. And I so can connect with that. I so can connect with that without giving you more details of my past and sexual abuse. I can connect with this idea of like, well, I've already, done worse. This is, I can deal with this. And so, yeah, so let's talk about some of the things that we blame the victim for sexual abuse, and we as in society. One, I think a lot of people say, well, she was asking for it. And I want to talk about that because I think first and foremost, I think she was unaware. And the thing is, what I actually, part of my purpose with this podcast is to honor the feminine nature in women, because part of the feminine nature is trusting. Every fifth search on the internet is for porn. That's 1 in 5 searches. And those are mostly men that are searching. Women's minds are not thinking about sex all day. They don't have, for the most part, far less, I'll say, of women are addicted to pornography. So their minds are not constantly thinking about sex the way men's are very often. So when she wears what she wears, she's thinking her body looks good, but she's not thinking she's doing this because she wants other people to want to have sex with her. That's not what she's even thinking. She's thinking, oh, wow, I look so cute. My body looks good. That's why I'm wearing tighter clothes. But she's not thinking, if I walk into a room, men are going to look at me and be like, wow, I really want to have sex with her. And they start visualizing her body underneath her clothes. That is not what she thinks. And that's a natural feminine, again, nature for her to trust. Another thing is she wants to be adored. That is a deep desire of the feminine, is wanting to be attractive and wanting to be adored. And in marriage, that's an appropriate desire for that to be met. In our culture, sadly, there aren't good marriages that reflect this adoration of the feminine. And so in our culture, so many times women have not experienced that respect and desire of a single man, that as single as in like one man who gives her that. And so immodesty makes her adored by, what kind of the societal norms are for what the way people dress. So when they're immodest, they get more attention because, once again, that's the way men are thinking. They're thinking sexually, and so that's what they're thinking about her body. And that's why women wear very tight clothes. For example, let's say tight yoga pants, exercise pants, which shows all the curves of her butt and legs and all that, which is super sexy. And men, they don't wear tight things when they go exercise because women don't care. We're not thinking about sex with men when they walk by. We're thinking, he should cover up because I don't really want to see that stuff. That's not my husband. So women think very differently. That's that trusting nature. So when she dresses a certain way, she is not, quote, asking for it. She is simply not thinking about it. She wants to be adored, and she assumes these people are adoring her without ulterior motives. And that's the same in when she goes to their apartment after a date. She thinks they're going to have a good time. He wants to spend time with her, not that we're going to his apartment to have sex. That's not the automatic. Maybe because of her experience, that's becoming more of in her thought process, but I would say for the most part, in the beginning, she's thinking, this is totally benign. And I've been there. I have been there literally. And this was not even when I was a virgin. This is after I had been dating. I remember going to someone's apartment, and my assumption was it was because he wanted to, I don't know, just hang out more and drink some more wine. And, and his assumption was very different, and I had to leave. So that trusting nature. Another one is that men and even just the society, the culture accuses the victim and says something like, well, why didn't she stop it? She's a capable woman. Why didn't she stop what was going on? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, but I'm going to give a few. One is she can't believe it's happening. Once again, going back to, she's not wired to assume the worst around sexuality. She's wired to trust. I'm going to talk about the feminine nature in a little bit. Another thing is she just thinks he's going to stop, if he sees that she's not enjoying it, or she just thinks like he'll clearly stop what he's doing. Like, he can't be such a monster to, do something to her while she's in pain or giving him bad looks. Like, why would he, he must be a monster to do such a thing. There's this just gut reaction that he's not going to do something awful. And I actually, the guy that I pushed out of my apartment, I remember not being that scared, honestly, because even if I wasn't able to get him out, I was more so getting out because I was just frustrated that he was like trying to get me back into my room. I was like, get out. I don't want you here. Like, that was kind of my response, but it wasn't this fear reaction of like, oh my gosh, he's about to rape me. And that was the same response when I was pulling my friend out of the bathroom. I remember like, it was more like, hey, don't do that to my friend. You can't just put her in there. She doesn't want to go in there. But it wasn't this fear of like, she's about to get raped. And it's strange, like, me as a woman, I just don't assume that. Now years and years of, doing this work and later I can see that no, that's exactly what was going to happen. But I think, as women, we just don't, that just doesn't go through our head. And so, another one is, number 3, like maybe it hasn't happened before, so she doesn't know what to do. So she's kind of has her guard down. And then the other flip side of that is maybe it has happened before, and maybe she, wasn't able to stop it or didn't expect it or all that. And so then she has this almost like precedent in her mind of saying, well, why stop it this time? It's already happened. Like, I've had worse. And I feel like that is kind of like my friend's story of how she was sexually harassed at her work function. In her mind, she's probably like, she was thinking, and she even told me this, like, well, I've had worse. Why stop it this time? And so that is another reason I think victims kind of freeze in the moment of this, like, we've already gone this far. That's another one that I've also felt victim of, is like, well, I've already, let him do X, Y, and Z. I mean, what's the point? And then, no, I didn't enjoy what ended up happening at all. But at the same time, and I felt horrible and gross and wrong and dirty and self-loathing. But at the same time, then it's this, well, I deserved it because I'm the one that let him do it. So another one is, number 4 is, this one's a difficult one because, I think this happens a lot, especially, and in any case of sexual abuse, but I want to kind of especially say for those that have been sexually abused and molested as children, I think there's a lot of shame of thinking that, well, I must have wanted it because there was a sexual response physically, because you felt something. Maybe you felt tingling, or you felt, swelling of your vulva, and, or if it's a man, if you had an erection because of the sexual nature of what was going on. But the problem is that well, what there's this wonderful woman. I'll have her TED talk in the show notes, but she talks about sexual non-concordance. And what that means is that even though your body is sexually becoming aroused or maybe sexually aroused, it doesn't mean that you want it, quote unquote. You don't want it just because your body is responding. And I think in our culture, that's the assumption, is that, if you're getting wet as a woman, that means you want what's coming to you. And the same thing as a man. And so that's a real problem, because that's when women feel like, well, I started getting turned on, so I must have wanted what was coming, but I feel so down and degraded, and I feel so negative and all these things. And it's like, no, you don't have to have wanted something just because your body responded. When there's sexual content, your body responds. You may or may not have experienced this while listening to my shows at times, but you might have felt titillated or, sexually aroused just because I'm talking about sex, but it's not because you somehow want what I'm specifically talking about. Like, people sexually become aroused when they hear about horrible sexual violence, but it's not because you want what just happened or you think that's a good thing. But what it is because it's sexual content. There's sexual content being described or whatever, and that's how your body's responding to it. So how do you know when you want sex? Is when you say, I want sex. When you decide, because of your values, because of your situation, because of who this person is, because of what you decide in power as a woman, that's when you want sex. It's not when your body starts feeling aroused or all that. Like, that's beside the point. What it is when you decide you want sex is when you want sex. And that's how consent should be approached and be talked about when you're talking to young women and young men, that she wants it when she says she wants it. And I think this sexual non-concordance gets really confused also just in terms of young people learning about their sexual identity. Their assumption is because their sexual response towards a particular person, the assumption is, or a particular situation or particular visuals or whatever, their assumption is, okay, I must be attracted to this. And once you focus on something, it grows. But sexual content is attractive. It is arousing. And so you're not saying, because I'm aroused by the female form, but I'm a woman, that doesn't mean that there's an identity that you need to ascribe to as being someone who's attracted to women. That's sexuality that you are seeing, and so your body is responding. All right, so that's one thing of like, as a child, maybe you felt like you wanted it, or maybe you even sought it out after you experienced it from that uncle or, someone who abused you. That is not your fault. You were not old enough to have consent. You were not old enough to say, yes, I've decided I want this. You were a child. You were too young. And even as an adult, if you haven't had the understandings and been able to make those decisions of, wow, he wanted to have sex with me, I didn't know that, and then I got coerced into it at the situation, you can realize that's not consent, that you can take off this shame. I mentioned just a little bit ago about having sex in marriage when you really don't want it, and throughout the whole sexual experience, you don't want it, you don't want it, you don't want it. That would make a woman feel abused and used. Now, I'm not saying that she is being abused by that kind of a situation. It's tricky because in my coaching, we would have to look carefully about what changes we can make so that you get the emotional needs met and you feel cherished, and then it happens in your marriage that you can feel loved in intimacy. But I want you to know and just have a little bit of revelation that more than likely you feel abused and you feel used because you are having sex when you don't want it. And that feels just like the world's view of sex for women, that they just have to take it because that's what a man wants. And her only purpose is to be his sexual pleasure. So I guess just put a pin in that and kind of think about that in your heart of like, if you're feeling that way, if you're doing that in your marriage, I want to challenge you to get to a place where you actually do enjoy sex and you do want to be all that you can be in sex and have a yes to sex rather than a, I don't want this, but he needs it. And, that's what I'm purposed for and all this kind of stuff. It's gross and it's wrong. But there's ways out of it without like a stark, we're not having sex until I want it. Cause I don't also believe that's the right way. So, just kind of let your heart kind of think about that, pray about it and see what, maybe from this, part of the episode, you just needed to know that you're treating your sex life like abuse. You're allowing yourself, and maybe it's time to get that changed. And like I said, if we were working one-on-one, I'd have the opportunity to really explore that with you. And it would take some time, but by God's grace, I think he can change that for you. All right, so let's talk more about sexual abuse and marriage. And so for a woman that has been abused previously, it affects her. It affects her view of her value. It affects her ability to be vulnerable. I'm going to talk more about that. It affects her ability to take sexual touch as positive and not scary or tense up or kind of like numb herself, guard herself to what's about to happen to the experience. Let me tell you something very important about women's experience of sex. First and foremost, for her to enjoy sex in any way, shape, or form, she has to feel safe. Now, you might think, women outside of marriage don't need this, and maybe not, and I can talk about that in a bit. But for a woman to truly long-term enjoy sex, she needs to feel safe. Shorter term, just living together, girlfriend, boyfriend, the way the world sees sex, it's different. It really is, because there's not an expectation and there's not this assumption of commitment that you can feel free, that you can feel safe. So we're going to talk more about the feminine and the masculine nature next week. But let me just talk about this a little bit so you get a sense of some of the next steps that I think you can take as a couple to get yourself to a more safe place with your sexuality. So you may know this already, but women and men both have testosterone and they both have estrogen in their bodies, and that is natural. And those particular chemicals have particular traits. So for example, testosterone is something that builds muscle and for a man allows him to be able to have erections, and it's kind of a strength chemical or hormone. And then for women, when they have a good amount of testosterone, they have high libido, which means they want sex in the in a healthy way. And for estrogen and testosterone also for men, if they're lacking testosterone, a lot of times they feel weak, they don't have a lot of energy, they don't have a lot of sex drive. So that's a healthy part of men and women. Estrogen, the same, is that, something for women, estrogen is really important in the health of their menstrual cycle, of ovaries, of preventing urinary tract infections, of supporting their mood. There's so many functions. And then for men, estrogen plays a really important role in their prostate health, in making sure that their bones are strong. In fact, too little estrogen can predispose men to osteoporosis and lead to bone fractures. But then too much estrogen can lead to actually men's development of like larger breasts, and also can be as a result of being overweight and those kinds of things, and can have unhealthy measures there. So there's a scientific backing to my what I'm going to be talking about next, about like there's more feminine and masculine natures. But see, testosterone is more in men, and estrogen is more in women, and that's healthy and good. But both men and women have both, and it's very important to their health. Okay, so let's talk about the nature of feminine. Oh, and let me just also say there's biblical precedence for this feminine and masculine nature in both men and women, and I'm going to be talking more about that next week. But I just as a cursory overview, the nature of the feminine is trusting, vulnerable, receptive, nurturing, empathetic, and motherly. And the nature of the masculine is powerful and leader and decisive and penetrating and protective and fatherly. So a woman may present as masculine, greater masculine traits, unless she feels safe to allow her femininity to be revealed, to be held, to allow herself to be vulnerable, for example. So in sex, for her femininity, for her ability to surrender and to feel vulnerable and to experience the deeper orgasms, she has to feel safe. For her resa to enjoy what is happening, and I call resa is the vulva, the labia majora, labia minora, the vagina, all of the beauty of what's in between the women's legs, that jewel, the clitoris, all of that, I call the resa, receiving him into her essence. I don't believe there's such terms that we have that are significant enough and more and beautiful enough to describe it. So I say resa, R-E-S-S-A. So anyway, it has to feel safe for her resa to enjoy what's happening. So the way I frame it is there's two different types of sex. There's connection and intimacy sex, which is the feminine. Typically in non-Christian settings, you might call that tantric sex. They really, I believe what you would say is they really explore the sex that's very feminine, and then the powerful and fierce sex, the masculine sex. The typical sex there is pornography. That's catering to the masculine. And so, my seduction course is all about basically the masculine sex, but it's focused on making yourself feel powerful. So basically both the connection and intimacy sex, the more feminine sex, and then the powerful and fierce sex, the more masculine sex, both are good and should be enjoyed by both men and women. So a whole man is able to enjoy the feminine sex, and a whole female, a whole woman, is able to enjoy both the powerful and fierce sex as well as the more feminine sex. So when I say whole, I mean someone who is able to embrace the full nature of how God made them. And they're able to kind of fall into that and enjoy it deeply, and the connection and the spiritual gift that sex is. So for a woman to heal from the sexual trauma, that what she needs is, as a priority number one, is to feel safe. And what I believe is a focus on the connection and intimacy sex for a while, because what she has experienced is the more masculine powerful, fierce sex that has not allowed her to be healed of the trauma that she has experienced. And so what I suggest is to do consistently what I call connection sessions. And this is a type of sex where the focus and the goal is not orgasm. In fact, that is a prerequisite of not being part of the experience. So these connection sessions are actually what it is I can't describe it very detailed on the podcast because I don't feel it's the right place for it. But if you go ahead and email me at bella@delightyourmarriage.com, I'll actually send you a description, and I'll also send you some very wholesome animations, I guess, of positions that would work for it. So there's nothing crude or negative that you would receive. But essentially, these connection sessions are to make a woman feel safe. And I describe that very practically in what I'll send you. So this would allow her to not have the focus on him, and the focus is instead on her and her feeling of safety. Now, what I suggest is not that you would trade all of your sexual experiences for just connection sex and you wouldn't orgasm necessarily ever, but that this is incorporated into your sexual life maybe every other time you make love, or maybe once or twice a week, so that slowly it becomes more trained in the woman that she is safe in your connection together, and that your member in her resa is actually a healing force rather than a trauma-inducing force. So that's really important. The other thing, hopefully, is counseling. I really encourage you to go to a therapist or a counselor or speak to someone that's going to be able to walk you through, hear your trauma, listen to what happened, believe your story. That's very, very, very important. Also, there's some resources that I would love for you to watch that TED Talk that I'm going to have on the show notes page. You can just go to delightyourmarriage.com and click on resources. I'm sorry, not click on resources. Click on this episode and you'll be able to find it there. The other thing is the nomore.org is a phenomenal website that gives support to women of all types of abuse. Sexual abuse is just one of their many focuses, but that's definitely one of the bigger ones. And then also to explore the the Me Too movement, which I think is really key. And there's tons of resources around that. And see if you can take it out of the context that a lot of the media has put it into, of being this demonizing men. And it's not. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to support those victims who have had to experience the trauma, and give them a voice and safety and healing. All right. Well, I hope that you will return next week, because we're going to be talking more about this feminine and masculine nature and what it means in your marriage to change your marriage, so that you are receiving the emotional needs that you desire, but not forcing them. So we're going to talk about that in actually practical ways to change it. But let me go ahead and pray for you. If this has meant something to you, the sexual abuse conversation, again, whether you've had very extreme, horrible trauma, or you've just lived in a society where women have been treated like meat, and that's just for the pleasure of men, or maybe you've lived in your marriage where you have felt sexually used, and that is just something that needs to change for you. So I just pray, Lord God, you are the healer. You are the one that can go in and do open heart surgery on us, but then also to just heal, slowly and peacefully and calmly. Sometimes we do need the really strong changes, but sometimes it's gentle. It's day by day, it's week by week, it's month by month. It takes time. God, I just ask for the woman on the other end of this line, God, that what she has experienced breaks your heart, that it wasn't fair, it wasn't okay. Lord, I ask that you would touch her heart, God, that you would let her know that she will be healed completely, 100%, that she is not a broken person because this happened to her. God, I ask that you would take away all shame of this experience, God, that whatever the situation was, God, that you paid for it by the blood. Lord, that you went to the cross and all of the sin and shame and brokenness you took with you, God. And this woman, this darling daughter, doesn't have to feel broken or dirty or sinful or stupid or ignorant or oblivious, that she can feel redeemed, she can feel confident, she can feel holy because you look at her as holy because of Jesus. Lord, I ask, God, that you would do a miracle in her heart and the way she sees herself. And God, I ask that for those that are in marriages that are not at a level where they feel safe in their sexual lives, I pray, God, that you would just begin to start turning the wheels of her heart and in her mind, to start being patient with herself and start considering and journaling and processing what this might mean for her, God. Lord, you are holy and you are good, and we trust that you are doing this amazing work. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, I look forward to talking to you next week. God bless you. I love you. Bye. Oh, and do go ahead and email me, belah@delightyourmarriage.com, and I'll send you right over the instructions for the connection sessions, so that can be a support for your marriage. God bless. belah@delightyourmarriage.com. Okay, talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening. Stop by delightyourmarriage.com to check out all the show notes, as well as many more resources and articles. Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.